Bipartisanship is an idea that should make everyone sick to their stomachs. When someone is out to kill you, or your nation, or your community, making a deal for the sake of quote-unquote bipartisanship or its related political spineless cop-out compromise makes no sense when the end result is injustice and a worsening of our lives. That's what I start out with today before moving on to two really important topics: the union organizing efforts underway at Amazon and the threats to unions after the coup in Myanmar. This is Jonathan Tassini, and it's great to have you with us for our show for February 10th, 2021. Of course, you can lend a hand to all our work by going over to workinglife.org. Look for the podcast tab and click over there, and you will see a link to Patreon, where you can sign up as a one-time sponsor or a monthly supporter, or you can do the same thing by using ActBlue. Go over to ActBlue and look for Working Life with Jonathan Tassini, and there you can also become a one-time sponsor or a monthly sponsor, and we hope you really will do that to give us a little money to keep this show going. I will say this, and it's a point I have made for many years, and also in my new Working Life newsletter, which you can subscribe to over at Substack: bipartisanship is clarifying. It is the glaring, loud tell that both parties accept the basic outlines of a corrupt, failed system. Now, sure, there is a difference in scale and a significant difference of money in some cases. If you look at the debate right now on the stimulus, it is blind, knee-jerk, failed leftist bloviating to not acknowledge that, yes, people will be somewhat better off in the short term, in some cases a lot better off with Democrats running the show. But note what I said, please. Short term. Ideologically, the debate is between, on the one hand, really nutty people who never let the facts get in the way of their mouths. Nutty people's views in economics are quite widespread and not confined to just QAnon wingnuts, versus the people who are mostly sane but who have bought the basic ideological framing of the system, especially when it comes to the economy. You can only envision the idea of quote-unquote bipartisanship if you also embrace the so-called free market system. The search for bipartisanship is a thing because all sides accept the outlines of capitalism and some of the fraudulent ideas baked into the system over decades. When you hear the never-ending media push narrative that the country would be so much better off if only politicians would stop fighting and embrace bipartisanship, it's nonsense. Yeah, sure, while the noise of this superficial arguing absorbs the chattering classes, in reality, every day there is grand consensus that flows. That tax cuts are good, especially if tax cuts help small business and the quote-unquote middle class. That CEOs are bright people who should be treated with over-the-top respect, as opposed to valuing the actual workers who create what society values. That the so-called free market is American exceptionalism's gift to the world. That if you're unemployed, it's mostly your fault, so unemployment benefits should be kept meager to make sure you get your ass back to work and don't sit on your couch eating bonbons. That free trade is forward-looking and good, while protectionism is backwards and bad, and on and on and on. I'm really going to focus in this chat on the economy, but I will make this basic point about foreign policy. Bipartisanship, and you've heard the bullshit about national security rising above partisanship. Well, that has meant support for war after war, coup after coup, and unrestrained Pentagon spending year after year. The cost in human life is immeasurable, here and around the world. The killing of millions of people outright in immoral wars, and the wasting of trillions of dollars over many decades that could have gone to serve the people's needs, all in the service of bipartisanship. Now, to be fair, the bipartisan curse is not a new phenomenon foisted on the country by Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer. Take healthcare. Millions of people get sick every year or go bankrupt because of so-called bipartisanship. What do I mean? The collapse of the healthcare reform in the mid-1990s, the so-called Hillary Care, was certainly due in part to the corrupt insurance industry's opposition to the Clinton healthcare plan. That's the only narrative, though, that the Clinton world and their enablers wanted to spread around. And they stiff-armed anyone else who would say that the real clear lesson for the people from the debacle of 1994 is that we had to kill the private healthcare industry and enact Medicare for all, because you can't negotiate with an industry that has no interest in the health of Americans and only cares about making obscene profits to pay CEOs outlandish salaries and benefits. A conclusion that is ignored by politicians for bipartisan reasons who take campaign contributions from the insurance industry and big pharma. Or take the ginned up deficit hysteria that we hear today and in the past. In 2010, Obama created the idiotic bipartisan National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform that was also known in shorthand as the Deficit Commission, but more accurately described by many of us, including yours truly, as the Cat Food Commission. Because we knew that the end result of this idiotic endeavor would be cuts to Social Security and Medicare, all in the name of bipartisanship, to address the deficit and debt crisis, which was and is a manufactured, non-existent crisis. But for the sake of bipartisanship, if the commission's recommendations became law, seniors would go hungry because Social Security checks would be smaller in real terms, or they would actually die because they couldn't afford healthcare costs. Now, I've said this before, progressives have a lot of legitimate beefs with Nancy Pelosi, but at least she had the gumption to say back then, in opposition to the president from her own party, that there would be no cuts to Social Security or Medicare on her watch. Now, I mean, how seriously foolish is the bipartisan chatter around the stimulus bill right now, as if this sacred bipartisanship holy grail is worth sacrificing even $1 from the proposed, quite modest, given the crisis, $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, or other aspects of the bill being proposed by Bernie Sanders. Consider this. For the sake of bipartisanship and the ego of the fifth columnist, Joe Manchin, the president is considering compromising on who gets relief checks, when the truth is that workers should be getting $2,000 every month until the pandemic is vanquished and the unemployment rate declines for consecutive months to pre-pandemic levels, with special focus on making sure Black and Latino workers' unemployment falls. When bipartisanship is a reason to oppose hiking the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and that opposition again coming from, most vocally, fifth columnist Joe Manchin, this is simply a cover for continuing the 50-year robbery of the fruits of the people's sweat of the brow, and instead enriching people like Jeff Bezos. Because the minimum wage should actually be around $22 an hour if you look at productivity over the past 3 or 4 decades. And actually, if you raised it to $15 an hour, that would only bring in the princely gross income of $31,200 a year, which is just a bit over the federal poverty line for a family of 4. And let's face it, those poverty line levels understate what it actually costs in the real world to survive. As long as bipartisanship lives, we will never fix this country, because bipartisanship is an acceptance of the free market system that got the people into the deep hole over many decades. But the sad reality today is crystal clear. Bipartisanship is a feature, not a bug, because it sustains those in power.